Chapter 1. The Flight. Jamal Carter adjusted his carry-on bag in the overhead compartment, careful not to disturb the neatly arranged luggage of other passengers. At 32, he had flown enough to master the unspoken etiquette of air travel. The familiar pre-flight bustle surrounded him, passengers shuffling into their seats, attendants offering practiced smiles, the low hum of the aircraft preparing for departure. "Excuse me? Is this 18B?" A trembling voice drew his attention. Jamal looked up to see an elderly white woman, perhaps in her 70s, clutching her boarding pass with visibly shaking hands. Her pearl necklace quivered against her buttoned-up blouse, and her eyes darted nervously around the cabin. "Yes, ma'am. You're right next to me." Jamal smiled warmly, gesturing to the window seat beside him. "Would you like some help with your bag?" The woman nodded gratefully, and Jamal easily lifted her small suitcase into the compartment above. As a social worker who specialized in crisis intervention, he had developed an eye for distress, and this woman was clearly terrified. "First time flying?" he asked gently as she settled into her seat, fumbling with the seatbelt. "Is it that obvious?" She attempted a laugh that sounded more like a wheeze. "I've managed to avoid these contraptions for 73 years, but my son insisted I come for my grandson's graduation." Her fingers struggled with the metal clasp. "I'm Margaret, by the way. Margaret Whitmore." "Jamal Carter." He helped her secure the seatbelt. "And there's nothing to worry about, Ms. Whitmore. Flying is statistically—" "Please, call me Margaret," she interrupted, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrests. "And forgive me if I don't find statistics comforting at the moment." The plane began to taxi, and Margaret's breathing became more labored. Jamal recognized the signs immediately: the rapid, shallow breaths, dilated pupils, the rising panic. He'd seen it countless times in his work with trauma survivors. "Margaret, look at me," he said calmly. "We're going to breathe together, okay? In through your nose, count to 4. She tried to follow his instructions, but as the plane accelerated down the runway, her breathing deteriorated further. I can't, she gasped, clutching at her chest. Jamal quickly reached for his water bottle. "Here, small sips." He placed it gently in her hand, but her trembling was so severe that water sloshed over the rim. "The oxygen—" Margaret pointed weakly above them, her face alarmingly pale now. Jamal reached up to locate the oxygen mask compartment, explaining softly, "Those only drop in emergencies, but look." He pointed to the air vent above, adjusting it to blow toward her face. "Feel that cool air? Focus on that. And here—" He took her hand and placed it against his chest. "Feel my breathing. Try to match it." A middle-aged woman across the aisle glanced over, her expression shifting from casual interest to alert concern. She nudged her husband, who looked up from his magazine with a frown. Jamal didn't notice them. His focus remained entirely on Margaret, whose breath was coming in desperate gasps now. He recognized a full-blown panic attack. "Margaret, I'm going to help you through this. I work with people in crisis every day. You're having a panic attack, but you're safe. The plane is fine. I'm right here with you." The flight attendant, a young woman named Kelly according to her name tag, was making her way down the aisle for the final check before takeoff. The woman across the aisle caught her attention with a quick wave. "Is everything okay?" Kelly asked, approaching their row. Before Jamal could respond, the woman across the aisle spoke in a hushed, urgent tone. "That man is bothering her. Look how terrified she is." Kelly's gaze shifted to Jamal, who was still guiding Margaret through breathing exercises, his hand now holding hers supportively. "Sir, is there a problem?" Kelly's voice carried a new edge. "She's having a panic attack," Jamal explained professionally. "I'm a social worker. I'm just helping her through some grounding techniques." Margaret tried to nod in confirmation, but she was hyperventilating now, tears streaming down her face. The husband across the aisle stood up partially. Doesn't look like you're helping much. Maybe you should leave the lady alone. Jamal felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the sensation that always came when his intentions were questioned because of his skin color. But years of professional training kicked in. Sir, I understand your concern, but I think you should return to your seat, sir, Kelly interrupted, misunderstanding that Jamal was already in his assigned seat. This is my seat, Jamal said calmly. 18A. I'm trying to help her through a panic attack. She's afraid of flying. By now, several other passengers were watching. One had their phone out, recording the interaction. Margaret was still gasping for air, which only reinforced the growing perception that she was afraid of Jamal rather than the flight. Ma'am, are you okay? Do you want to change seats? Kelly asked Margaret directly, her hand already on the call button. Margaret shook her head and tried to speak, but no coherent words emerged through her panicked breathing. I think we should separate them, the woman across the aisle insisted. She's clearly uncomfortable. Kelly nodded and turned to Jamal. Sir, for everyone's comfort, I'm going to have to ask you to move. She needs medical attention, Jamal insisted, his professional concern overriding his growing frustration. Not a seat change. She's having a severe panic attack. The cabin phone rang, and Kelly answered it. Jamal could hear the pilot's voice on the other end, though not the words. After a brief exchange, Kelly's expression hardened. The captain has been notified of a situation in the cabin, she announced, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. We'll be making an unscheduled landing in Denver to resolve this matter. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Jamal sat in stunned silence, aware of the growing number of phone cameras now pointed in his direction. Margaret was still beside him, tears streaming down her face, trying desperately to communicate but producing only breathless gasps. The next 40 minutes were among the longest of Jamal's life. He remained in his seat, attempting to project calm while acutely aware of the suspicious glances from fellow passengers. He tried once more to help Margaret with breathing exercises, but Kelly returned immediately. Sir, I've asked you to leave her alone, she said firmly. We'll have medical personnel meet us in Denver. When the plane touched down in Denver, Jamal could see police vehicles waiting on the tarmac. His heart sank. He knew what was coming. Margaret, he said quietly, when you can speak, please tell them I was only trying to help you. The elderly woman nodded weakly, her breathing slightly more controlled now, but her face still ashen. The cabin door opened, and 3 airport police officers boarded, directed immediately to Jamal's row by the flight attendant. Sir, we need you to come with us, the lead officer stated. I haven't done anything wrong, Jamal said clearly, aware that multiple passengers were still recording. This woman was having a panic attack. I was helping her with breathing techniques. I'm a licensed social worker. Stand up slowly and keep your hands where we can see them, the officer replied, ignoring his explanation. Jamal complied, knowing that resistance would only make things worse. As he stood, Margaret reached out weakly to grasp his hand, but one of the officers quickly stepped between them. It's okay, Margaret, Jamal said. Get some water and keep taking deep breaths. You'll be fine. The officers escorted him down the aisle, past rows of staring passengers. Some looked confused, others vindicated. One man nodded approvingly at the police. Jamal kept his face neutral, his posture non-threatening, and his movements slow, all the things he'd learned over the years as a black man in America to avoid escalation. But when they reached the jetway, away from the passenger's view, the situation changed. On the ground! Now! One officer shouted suddenly. What? I'm cooperating, Jamal began. Before he could finish, he was forced face down onto the jetway floor, his cheek pressed against the rough carpet. One officer's knee pressed into his back as his arms were wrenched behind him and cold handcuffs clicked around his wrists. I didn't do anything, Jamal insisted, his professional calm finally cracking. "She was having a panic attack. I was helping her breathe." "We got reports of you harassing an elderly passenger and creating a disturbance," the officer replied, pulling him roughly to his feet. "You caused an emergency landing. That's a federal offense." As they marched him through the terminal, handcuffed and flanked by officers, Jamal felt the familiar weight of public judgment. Travelers stopped to stare and whisper. Some raised phones to capture his humiliation. By nightfall, those videos would spread across social media like wildfire, accompanied by headlines like, "Black passenger forces emergency landing after terrorizing elderly woman," and "Disturbed man subdued after mid-air incident." And in the din of accusation and assumption, the truth would be the quietest voice of all. Chapter 2. The Aftermath. The holding cell at Denver International Airport's security office smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Jamal sat on the hard bench, his back against the wall, hands finally free of handcuffs, but his dignity still in shackles. 4 hours had passed since the plane had landed. 4 hours of questioning, of explaining, of being disbelieved. "Mr. Carter," the TSA investigator had said, reviewing his notes for the third time, "multiple witnesses report that you were harassing Mrs. Whitmore, causing her visible distress." "I was helping her through a panic attack," Jamal had repeated, his voice hoarse. "She was afraid of flying, not of me. I'm trained in crisis intervention. It's literally my job." The investigator had looked skeptical. "Your credentials check out, but that doesn't explain why the flight crew felt it necessary to divert the aircraft. Airlines don't make emergency landings on a whim." Now, alone in the cell, Jamal closed his eyes. His phone had been confiscated, so he couldn't call his sister to explain why he wouldn't make it to San Francisco tonight. He couldn't check the social media storm he knew was brewing. And he couldn't contact his colleagues who were expecting him to present his research on trauma-informed care at tomorrow's conference. The door opened, and a different officer appeared. "Carter, you're free to go." Jamal blinked in surprise. "What?" "The airline isn't pressing charges. They've rebooked you on a flight tomorrow. Here's your property." The officer handed him a plastic bag containing his phone, wallet, and belt. As Jamal collected his belongings, the officer added, "Word of advice, next time, mind your own business. Not everyone wants your help." The words stung, but Jamal said nothing. He'd heard variations of this sentiment throughout his career, the implication that his assistance was unwelcome simply because of who he was. Outside the security office, the airport had quieted for the night. Jamal found a charging station near an empty gate and plugged in his dead phone. When it finally powered on, the notifications flooded in. Missed calls from his sister, texts from colleagues, and dozens of news alerts. With a growing sense of dread, he opened one of the news stories. "Breaking! Disturbing incident aboard United Airlines Flight Force's emergency landing in Denver. Witnesses report a male passenger harassing an elderly woman, causing panic among travelers. Video footage shows the man being removed by police." The accompanying blurry image was unmistakably him, being led away in handcuffs. Jamal scrolled through the comments, each one a fresh wound. "Why am I not surprised what he looks like? Poor old lady was terrified. Thank God they got him off the plane. This is why I always stay alert when traveling. You never know who's sitting next to you." He closed the browser, his hands shaking slightly. This wasn't the first time he'd been misjudged, but the public scale of it was overwhelming. Tomorrow, he was supposed to stand before hundreds of colleagues discussing methods to build trust with vulnerable populations. How could he do that when his own trustworthiness had been so publicly questioned? His phone rang. His sister Aisha. "Jamal, what happened? Are you okay? It's all over the news." Her familiar voice broke something in him. For the first time since the incident began, Jamal felt tears threatening. "I'm okay. he managed. Physically, anyway. They're saying you harassed some old lady? I know that's not true. She was having a panic attack, Aisha. I was helping her breathe through it. But everyone saw what they wanted to see. There was a pause on the line. When Aisha spoke again, her voice was filled with the weary recognition they'd both carried since childhood. Because you're a big black man and she was a little white lady. Yeah, the simplicity of it was exhausting. Pretty much. Are you still coming to the conference? Jamal sighed. They rebooked me for tomorrow, but I don't know if I should. The whole internet thinks I'm some kind of threat now. Which is exactly why you need to be at that conference, Aisha insisted. Your work matters, Jamal. Especially now. Don't let them take that from you, too. After hanging up, Jamal booked a hotel room for the night. The small television on the dresser greeted him with his own story on the local news, the chyron reading mid-air scare as grainy cell phone footage showed him being escorted off the plane. He turned it off and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Carter, this is Dr. Alan Whitmore, Margaret Whitmore's son. The airline gave me your number. I'm trying to understand what happened on that flight with my mother. Please call me when you can. Jamal sat up, heart pounding. Margaret's son. Would this be an angry confrontation or something else? He dialed the number. Dr. Whitmore? This is Jamal Carter. Mr. Carter. The voice on the other end was measured, academic. Thank you for calling back. I understand there was an incident involving my mother on your flight today. Yes, sir. She was experiencing what appeared to be a severe panic attack. As a clinical social worker, I recognized the symptoms and tried to help her through it. Unfortunately, Jamal hesitated, unsure how to describe the cascade of misperceptions without sounding defensive. Unfortunately, people assumed the worst, Dr. Whitmore finished for him. Yes, I'm beginning to piece that together. My mother is resting now, she's quite exhausted. But before she fell asleep, she was insistent about one thing, that you were helping her, not harming her. Relief washed over Jamal. Is she okay? She will be. The doctor says it was indeed a panic attack, exacerbated by altitude and dehydration. Mr. Carter, I want to apologize for what happened to you. You have nothing to apologize for, Dr. Whitmore. Perhaps not personally, but as someone who benefits from a system that automatically assumed the worst about you. I think I do. There was a pause. My mother wants to speak with you when she's feeling better. Would that be all right? Of course, Jamal replied, though he wasn't entirely sure it was a good idea. What more could be said? Thank you. And Mr. Carter? For what it's worth, I've seen the videos circulating online. They're showing everything except what actually happened. It's troubling. After the call ended, Jamal checked social media again, against his better judgment. The incident had gained traction, now trending nationally. Someone had identified him, linking to his professional profile at the community center where he worked. This is the guy who terrorized that grandmother on the plane. He works with children. A Bay Community Center, do you support this behavior? His workplace was being tagged now. By morning, they would be inundated with demands to fire him. The conference organizers might withdraw his speaking invitation. Years of work building his reputation could unravel in hours because of a misunderstanding born of prejudice. Jamal turned off his phone and tried to sleep, but rest eluded him. Around 3 a.m., he gave up and opened his laptop. If he couldn't control the narrative being created about him, he could at least focus on the work that had brought him to this moment. He reviewed his presentation slides, making small adjustments, infusing the content with an even deeper understanding of what it meant to be misjudged, to have assumptions override reality. If nothing else, he now had a devastating personal example of how perception could diverge from truth and the real human cost of that divergence. Chapter 3. The Media Storm. By the time Jamal's replacement flight landed in San Francisco the following afternoon, the story had morphed into a full-blown media spectacle. His sister Aisha met him at the arrivals gate, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. "It's gotten worse," she said, hugging him tightly. "They've identified you. Your name and picture are everywhere." Jamal nodded grimly. "I know. My director called this morning. The center's getting hate mail." "What did she say?" "That she believes me and knows my character, but the board is concerned about optics." He shrugged, trying to seem more nonchalant than he felt. "Welcome to America, where innocence is irrelevant if enough people on Twitter decide you're guilty." The taxi ride to the hotel where the conference was being held passed in relative silence. Occasionally, Aisha's phone would buzz with new alerts about the story, each ping making Jamal wince. "They're calling you the airline aggressor now," she said, scrolling through news alerts. "God, they love their alliteration when demonizing black men." At the hotel, several attendees recognized Jamal as they checked in, their reactions ranging from awkward avoidance to concerned approaches. "I saw what happened," one colleague whispered. "It's disgusting how they're portraying you." Another was more direct. "The conference committee is meeting about your presentation. Some sponsors are nervous about the publicity." Jamal nodded, thanking them both for their support, but growing increasingly certain that his professional humiliation was only beginning. In his room, he turned on the television to find a panel of experts discussing the incident on a major news network. "While we don't know all the details," a silver-haired security consultant was saying, "this incident highlights the importance of situational awareness when traveling. If you see something concerning, alert the flight crew immediately." "But isn't there a risk of racial profiling in these situations?" the host asked. "Safety has to come first," another panelist interjected. "The passengers who reported this man did exactly what they should have done. Better safe than sorry." Jamal turned off the TV, a bitter taste in his mouth. No one had interviewed him. No one had even attempted to contact him for his side of the story. His narrative had been written for him. He was the threat, the danger, the reason a plane full of innocent people had been inconvenienced. His phone rang, the conference organizer. "Jamal, I'm so sorry about all this," Dr. Reyes began. "The committee has been discussing your presentation tomorrow." "Here it comes," Jamal thought. "We've decided to move you to the main hall instead of the breakout session." Jamal blinked in surprise. "What? Your work is more important now than ever. We want more people to hear it. That is, if you still feel up to presenting?" "I do," Jamal said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Thank you for not backing down." "Of course not. Though I should warn you, there will likely be media present. This story has taken on a life of its own." After the call, Jamal sat on the edge of the hotel bed, trying to process the rapid evolution of events. What had started as a simple act of kindness was now a national conversation about race, perception, and fear. And somehow, he was at the center of it all, a reluctant symbol rather than a person. His phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Whitmore. "Mr. Carter, my mother is feeling better and would like to speak with you. Also, we're disturbed by the media coverage. This narrative needs correction." Before Jamal could respond, another message came through. "Turn on Channel 4 now." Jamal grabbed the remote and switched on the local news. There on screen was Margaret Whitmore, seated in what appeared to be a hospital room, looking frail but determined. "I need to set the record straight," she was saying, her voice shaking slightly but clear. "The young man on that plane, Mr. Carter, was not harassing me. I was having a terrible panic attack, my first time flying at 73 years old, and he was helping me through it." The reporter looked startled by this revelation. "So, the emergency landing was completely unnecessary," Margaret finished firmly. If people had asked what was happening instead of assuming the worst, they would have known that man was trying to save me, not harm me. He's a hero, not a villain. The camera pulled back to reveal Dr. Alan Whitmore standing beside his mother's chair, his hand on her shoulder. My mother wanted to make this statement as soon as she was able, he explained. The way Mr. Carter has been portrayed in the media is not just inaccurate, it's harmful. And it raises serious questions about the assumptions we make based on appearance. The reporter turned to the camera. For those just joining us, we're speaking with Margaret Whitmore and her son, Dr. Alan Whitmore, who we should note is Senator Charles Whitmore's mother and father, respectively. Their statement directly contradicts earlier reports about yesterday's diverted flight. Jamal sank back onto the bed, overwhelmed by this unexpected turn. Margaret was a senator's mother? No wonder the media had jumped on this story so quickly. And now, just as quickly, the narrative was shifting. His phone began ringing incessantly, unknown numbers, likely journalists who had finally found him. He silenced it and texted Dr. Whitmore instead. Just saw the interview. Please thank your mother for her courage in speaking up. The reply came moments later. She insists on thanking you in person. We'll be at your conference tomorrow. Chapter 4. The Presentation. The conference hall buzzed with anticipation. What would normally have been a modest gathering of social work professionals in a side room had transformed into a standing room-only event in the main auditorium. Word had spread overnight that Jamal Carter, now a household name due to the viral incident, would still be presenting his research. Jamal stood backstage, adjusting his tie and trying to calm his racing heart. Through a gap in the curtains, he could see journalists setting up cameras at the back of the hall. Several rows near the front had been reserved, though he wasn't sure for whom. Dr. Reyes approached with a supportive smile. Quite the turnout. Are you ready? As ready as I'll ever be, Jamal replied. Did you see the Whitmore's statement last night? Everyone did. It's why we have media here now. But Jamal, Dr. Reyes placed a hand on his shoulder. Don't feel pressured to address the incident if you don't want to. You're here to present your research. That's enough. Jamal nodded gratefully, though he knew the incident would hang in the air regardless of whether he acknowledged it. Minutes before he was set to begin, there was a commotion at the entrance. Heads turned as Margaret Whitmore entered in a wheelchair, pushed by her son. Behind them strode a tall, distinguished man whom Jamal recognized instantly from news coverage, Senator Charles Whitmore. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The Whitmores made their way to the reserved seats in the front row, Margaret's eyes scanning the stage until she spotted Jamal. She raised a hand in greeting, her face breaking into a warm smile. Dr. Reyes stepped to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, we're honored to welcome you to this special presentation on trauma-informed crisis intervention. Our speaker today is Jamal Carter, a clinical social worker whose innovative approaches have transformed outcomes for vulnerable populations across the Bay Area. As Jamal took the stage, the applause was tentative at first, then grew stronger, led, he noticed, by Margaret Whitmore's enthusiastic clapping. Thank you, he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. My presentation today focuses on the gap between perception and reality in crisis situations, and how that gap can be widened by prejudice or narrowed by understanding. He advanced to his first slide, which displayed the title, Seeing Beyond Assumptions, the Life-Saving Power of Perception Shift. I had prepared this topic months ago, Jamal continued, allowing himself a small smile. Though I admit recent events have given me a rather intense personal connection to the material. A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the audience. For the next 40 minutes, Jamal delivered the presentation he had prepared, but with a new depth and resonance. He spoke about how trauma manifests, how crisis responders can misinterpret signals, and how cultural biases can lead to dangerous escalations rather than de-escalations. He shared case studies and research findings, his professional expertise evident in every carefully articulated point. What he didn't do was play for sympathy. He didn't center his own experience or use it to shame. Instead, he channeled it into his work, allowing it to infuse his words with authentic urgency. As he neared the conclusion, Jamal finally addressed the elephant in the room. 2 days ago, I witnessed someone in acute distress and attempted to help using the very techniques we've discussed today. What followed was a cascade of misperceptions that spiraled into a situation none of us wanted. He paused, meeting the gaze of audience members. I could stand here and express anger at how quickly I was misjudged, but instead, I want to focus on what this teaches us about the work we all do. He advanced to his final slide, which showed a simple photograph of 2 people in conversation, one speaking, one listening intently. The most powerful tool in crisis intervention isn't a technique or a protocol, Jamal said. It's the willingness to see beyond our first assumptions, to ask questions before drawing conclusions, to recognize that fear can make us perceive threats where none exist. In the front row, Margaret Whitmore nodded vigorously, tears streaming down her face. I still believe in the power of human connection to overcome prejudice, Jamal concluded. I still believe that most people want to do the right thing. And I still believe that our work, seeing people at their most vulnerable and responding with compassion rather than judgment, can change not just individual lives, but society itself. Thank you. The applause was immediate and thunderous. People rose to their feet, many wiping away tears. Senator Whitmore stood tall, his applause deliberate and respectful. Dr. Whitmore helped his mother to her feet so she could join the standing ovation. During the Q&A that followed, a journalist stood to ask the question everyone was waiting for. Mr. Carter, how do you feel about what happened on that plane? Are you angry at how you were treated? Jamal considered the question carefully before responding. I'm disappointed in a system that's designed to see certain people as threats by default. But anger? He shook his head. Anger would suggest that what happened was unusual or surprising. The reality is that versions of this happen every day to people who look like me, just usually without cameras rolling or senators' mothers involved. Another hand rose, a young black social work student. After what you went through, how do you maintain the courage to keep helping people? I'd be afraid of being misunderstood again. Jamal smiled gently. The day I stop helping people because I'm afraid of being misjudged is the day prejudice wins, and I'm not willing to give it that victory. After the presentation, as attendees clustered in small groups discussing what they'd heard, the Whitmore family approached Jamal. Margaret reached for his hand. My dear boy, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. I never properly thanked you. If you hadn't recognized what was happening to me, if you hadn't stayed calm and helped me breathe. You would have been fine, Jamal assured her. Someone else would have helped. No, Margaret said firmly. They didn't. They were too busy assuming you were the problem to see that I was in distress. Only you saw what was really happening. Senator Whitmore extended his hand. Mr. Carter, my mother has told me everything. I want you to know that I'm calling for a congressional inquiry into airline protocols for medical emergencies versus security threats. What happened to you was unacceptable. Jamal shook the senator's hand, aware of the cameras capturing the moment from across the room. Thank you, Senator. But if you really want to make a difference, focus on the thousands of similar incidents that happen without cameras or powerful families to set the record straight. I intend to, the senator replied, his expression serious. Starting with a public statement this afternoon. We'd like you to be there, if you're willing. Chapter 5. Quiet Justice. The senator's press conference that afternoon made national headlines. Standing before a forest of microphones with Jamal and Margaret flanking him, Senator Whitmore delivered a powerful condemnation of the incident. What happened on that flight represents a shameful pattern in our society, where help is mistaken for harm simply because of the color of the helper's skin. Mr. Carter didn't just assist my mother during a medical emergency. He exposed a systemic failure that endangered both of them. The story that had begun as disruptive passenger forces emergency landing transformed overnight into hero social worker mistreated, senator demands reform. Major networks ran special segments examining racial bias in emergency response. Op-eds filled newspaper columns. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #I stand with Jamal and #See the real emergency. For Jamal, the attention was both validating and exhausting. Interview requests flooded in, his inbox filled with messages, some supportive, others hateful. The airline issued a formal apology and promised an internal investigation into the incident. The flight attendant who had escalated the situation was placed on administrative leave pending review. Through it all, Jamal maintained a dignified silence. He declined most interview requests and redirected attention to the broader issues at play rather than his personal experience. When asked by a persistent reporter why he wouldn't tell his side more vocally, he replied simply, "Because this isn't about sides. It's about seeing clearly." 2 weeks after the incident, Jamal received an unexpected email from the conference organizers. His presentation had been viewed online more than 2 million times, an unheard-of number for an academic social work talk. Universities were requesting permission to use it in their curricula. Mental health organizations wanted him to conduct training sessions. But the email that truly moved him came from a group of black high school students in Oakland. "Dear Mr. Carter, we watched your talk in class today. Our teacher says you showed dignified resistance by continuing your work despite what happened to you. We're starting a peer counseling program at our school, and we wondered if you would come speak to us about crisis intervention techniques. We want to learn how to help each other without fear. Sincerely, the Future Helpers Club, Oakland Tech High School." That evening, Jamal called Margaret Whitmore, who had become something of a friend since the incident. "I've been thinking," he said after they had caught up on recent developments. "All this attention could be used for something meaningful." "What did you have in mind?" Margaret asked. "A foundation, not focused on what happened to me, but on training young people, especially those from marginalized communities, in crisis response and mental health first aid, teaching them to help others even in a world that might misinterpret their intentions." "The Quiet Justice Initiative," Margaret suggested, "because sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is to quietly continue doing good." With Senator Whitmore's political influence, Margaret's passionate advocacy, and Jamal's professional expertise, the foundation took shape rapidly. They secured initial funding, developed a curriculum, and launched pilot programs in schools across the country. 6 months later, Jamal stood at a podium again, this time on a much bigger stage. The red circle of the TED Talk logo glowed beneath his feet as he addressed an audience of thousands, with millions more watching online. "We live in a world where perception often overrides reality," he began. "Where a black man helping an elderly white woman through a panic attack becomes a threat rather than a healer. Where assumptions can lead to emergency landings and handcuffs rather than gratitude." He paced slowly across the stage, his voice measured and clear. "But the answer isn't to stop helping. It's never to stop helping. The answer is to change the systems that distort our perceptions of each other. And until those systems change, the answer is to help anyway, knowing the risks, accepting them, and moving forward with quiet determination." Behind him, a screen displayed images of the Quiet Justice Initiative in action, diverse teenagers learning pulse-taking techniques, practicing calm communication during simulated crises, role-playing de-escalation scenarios. These young people are learning more than just how to respond to medical emergencies, Jamal continued, gesturing toward the images. They're learning to believe in their capacity to help others even when the world questions their right to do so. They're learning that true justice sometimes comes not through loud protests, though those have their place, but through the quiet, persistent refusal to let fear win. The audience hung on his every word, the room silent except for his voice. On that plane, when I reached out to help Margaret Whitmore, I had no idea that simple act would change both our lives. I didn't know it would expose painful truths about how we see or fail to see each other. And I certainly didn't know it would lead to thousands of young people learning to be first responders in their communities. He paused, a gentle smile crossing his face. Margaret likes to call me a hero, but I reject that label. I was just a person who saw another person in distress and did what anyone should do. I helped. The real heroes are those who, having been misjudged and mistreated, choose to help again the next day and the day after that. In the front row, Margaret Whitmore dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Beside her sat her son and grandson, both watching Jamal with expressions of profound respect. The incident that brought me to this stage has been described as many things: a misunderstanding, a scandal, an outrage, a teaching moment. But I prefer to see it as a mirror, reflecting back to us the work we still have to do to truly see each other. Jamal moved to center stage for his conclusion. So I ask you, the next time you witness someone in crisis, will you see the emergency, or will you see your assumptions? Will you ask questions or jump to conclusions? Will you be part of the problem or part of the solution? He let the questions hang in the air for a moment. Because in that gap between perception and reality lies the difference between justice and injustice, between connection and division, between help given and help withheld. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. Epilogue. 1 year to the day after the flight that changed everything, Jamal Carter stood in the auditorium of Oakland Tech High School. Before him were 30 students wearing navy blue t-shirts emblazoned with the Quiet Justice Initiative logo, a simple outstretched hand. Today marks your graduation from this program, Jamal told them, pride evident in his voice. You've learned how to recognize signs of distress, how to de-escalate conflicts, how to provide basic mental health first aid. But most importantly, you've learned to see beyond surfaces, to look past prejudice and assumption to the humanity beneath. The students beamed back at him. Over the past year, they had become the pilot group for the initiative, and their success had been remarkable. School incidents requiring disciplinary action had decreased by 40%. Student self-reporting of anxiety and depression had dropped by nearly a third. And several students had successfully intervened in potential suicide attempts among their peers. After the ceremony, as students mingled with family members and enjoyed refreshments, a tall young man approached Jamal. Mr. Carter, I'm Marcus. I just wanted to say thank you. Jamal shook his hand warmly. For what specifically? You did all the hard work. Marcus shuffled slightly, seeming to gather his courage. Last week, there was this white lady at the bus stop. She was having some kind of attack. Couldn't breathe right, shaking all over. Everyone was just staring or walking past. I thought about what happened to you and I almost didn't help. But you did, Jamal said, already knowing where this was going. Yeah. I remembered what you taught us, about how the biggest act of resistance is sometimes just doing the right thing anyway. So I went over, talked her through breathing exercises like you showed us. Marcus paused, his expression softening. She grabbed my hand so tight, man. When the ambulance came, she told them I saved her life. Jamal felt a familiar tightness in his throat. You did good, Marcus? Thing is, Marcus continued, a bunch of people took videos. I was worried they'd edit it to make me look bad, you know? But later that night, they were all over neighborhood social media. Local teen hero saves woman having stroke. The paramedics even confirmed it was a stroke and said if I hadn't helped, she might have died. Jamal placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. That's what this is all about, Marcus. Changing the narrative one action at a time. As the event wound down, Jamal checked his phone to find a message from Margaret Whitmore. Now fully recovered from her fear of flying, she had been traveling the country with him, speaking to community groups about perception bias and the danger of assumptions. Just landed in Chicago for tomorrow's event, she'd written. The flight attendant recognized me from our appearances and asked if I was that lady from the viral video. When I confirmed, she told me they now use our incident in their training. Progress, one step at a time. Jamal smiled as he typed his reply. That's the thing about quiet justice. It doesn't make headlines, but it changes lives. See you tomorrow, Margaret. Later that evening, back in his apartment, Jamal opened his laptop to review the latest statistics from the initiative. In just 12 months, they had established programs in 53 schools across 15 states. More than 2,000 students had received training. The data showed significant impacts not just on the students themselves, but on their wider communities. A notification popped up on his screen, an email from a publisher interested in turning his story into a book. It wasn't the first such offer, but this one felt different. Rather than focusing on the incident itself, they wanted to highlight the initiative's work and the broader lessons about perception, prejudice, and the power of quiet resistance. Jamal closed the laptop without responding. He would consider it, certainly, but not tonight. Tonight he wanted to simply sit with the knowledge that something profoundly good had emerged from what could have been merely a painful memory. He thought about Marcus at the bus stop, choosing to help despite his fears. He thought about the flight attendants now learning from his experience. He thought about the thousands of small moments happening every day. Moments where people chose to see beyond their first impressions and connect with the humanity in others. The media frenzy had long since moved on to other stories. The viral videos had faded from social feeds. Senator Whitmore's proposed legislation on airline emergency protocols was still working its way through committee hearings. The world had not been transformed overnight. But change rarely came from grand gestures or headline-grabbing confrontations. Real change happened in quiet moments of choice, when someone decided to see differently, to question their assumptions, to help despite the risk of misunderstanding. As Jamal prepared for bed, his phone buzzed with one more message. This one was from a former colleague at the community center where he'd worked before the incident. Just had a client ask specifically for someone like that Jamal Carter guy. When I asked what she meant, she said, someone who sees the real emergency, not just the surface. Thought you'd want to know your impact continues. Jamal smiled. In a world that often mistook silence for weakness, he had discovered its true power. Not all battles needed to be fought with raised voices and public demands. Sometimes the most revolutionary act was to quietly continue doing what was right, to help the next person and the next and the next, regardless of how the world might perceive you. That was the essence of quiet justice, not the absence of action, but action untainted by ego, not surrender to injustice, but the steadfast refusal to let injustice determine your worth or limit your capacity to do good. As he drifted toward sleep, Jamal found himself thinking of something his grandmother used to say, "When they go low and loud, you go high and steady." She had lived through the civil rights era, had seen both the dramatic protests and the quiet daily acts of dignity that had eventually bent the arc of history toward justice. And now, in his own way, he was continuing that tradition, helping others find their own voices and their own paths toward creating a world where people were seen for who they truly were, not who others feared they might be. The headlines had faded. The social media storm had passed, but the work continued, quiet and steady, like a river slowly reshaping the landscape through which it flowed. That, Jamal knew, was how real change happened. Not in explosive moments that captured the world's fleeting attention, but in the patient, persistent effort to build something better. One interaction, one person, one moment of true seeing at a time. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.